All right, let's get going. This is Idiot Seeking Village, where we try to make sense of the senseless in our world. Adam, I got to be honest with you. I had this script written up, and I had a little jokey entrance bit to start off, based off of some stuff you and I chatted about.
Okay.
But we are recording the day after Charlie Kirk was shot and killed on a campus in Utah, and that's eerily relevant to today's topic. So I feel like gonna have to cut that. Yeah, I'm gonna cut out that joke, and I'm really I think best thing for us to do is to jump right in to it. And today's question comes straight from our group chat from a few weeks ago. That was the first time I personally heard the term, and it caught my interest immediately. Adam, are we already in a cold civil war, and or are we approaching a cold civil war?
Boy, I had never heard of the Cold Civil War before either until that. I don't even know if one really truly ever existed before. Unless, I guess maybe the lead up to a civil war is usually the cold part of the Civil War. But unfortunately, after yesterday's events, it's looking really a lot like that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that made me stop and think, right? My immediate response was, no, we've been in a cold civil war. And that was without even thinking about it. And then I sat back and was like, yeah, what does that mean? Have there been cold civil wars? And how should we be thinking about this, especially in light of yesterday's shooting? So I think I want to start with just digging back a little bit. Where the heck does cold civil war even come from? When did that term first come to use? So it was coined as a term by a gentleman named Angelo Codevilla. He was a conservative political thinker, a former member of the U.S. Foreign Service, and a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute. And in 2017, he wrote an article, The Cold Civil War. And his argument was that in the past quarter century, that the political ruling elite and the everyday people had diverged. Quoting from his article, "So many on all sides have withdrawn consent from one another that it is difficult to imagine how the trust and sympathy necessary for good government might ever return. Much of the heat in contemporary American politics comes from the attempt to force the entire nation to live in precisely the same way with precisely the same values." End quote. And he talks about immigration, school prayer, abortion, and marijuana as areas examples of where states and the federal government and Americans themselves culturally are already diverging in terms of how they want to treat those things. And remember, that's pre-Roe, right? Being overturned, right? 2017. And importantly, this is where the states are already in conflict with the federal government. Later that same year, Carl Bernstein, Washington Post journalist, the guy, Watergate fame, right? He used the term Cold Civil War, also in 2017, in regards to the Russian election interference issue. And he said, "It's a cauldron taking place in this hothouse of political debates, in which a fact-based debate is becoming impossible in this culture." And that's part of the difficulty here. We're just lobbing accusations back and forth in which a fact-based environment is almost impossible to maintain. Part of the Cold Civil War itself is the configuration of media, with Fox News, with CNN being perceived by different sets of viewers as representing different truths. End quote. And then in October of 2018, Charles Kessler, who's the editor of the Claremont Review of Books, that's the Claremont Institute, right, where Angelo Codevilla was a fellow, he wrote, "Underlying our cold civil war is the fact that America is torn increasingly between two rival constitutions, two cultures, two ways of life." So you've got intellectuals, big hitting names, influencers at the traditional institutional level, coming out, conservative and liberal, saying, it's starting to regularly throw out this term, right, shortly after Donald Trump's election, 2017-28. And it's only built since then, and it isn't a fringe metaphor. And I think that's an interesting theory that they start to throw out, but we need to be like, what kind of evidence do we have that this is actually happening, right? Like, let's take a look. It's easy to get caught up in the emotion of the moment and say that, right? But let's dig in a little bit. I want to take a look at something called stochastic warfare. Have you ever heard that term, Adam?
Stochastics, I definitely have heard of it in statistics classes, but God knows what, I don't remember that.
I don't remember what they use. I remember, there's some mathematical term, but stochastic warfare is basically, think of it as like guerrilla tactics plus chaos theory. The idea is you don't line up armies on a battlefield anymore. What you do is you incite or inspire scattered small actions, lone shooters, sabotage, intimidation that collectively destabilize your opponent. Right. So the conflict is asymmetrical, right? Again, no two armies going across from each other. The idea of it is that there's unpredictability. And we've seen it, right? Lone actor plots, intimidation of election officials, pipe bomb scares, and things of that nature that may or may not often are not real, but the idea is to intimidate. Obviously, the shooting yesterday at the Utah campus, right? Big government structures are really bad at countering that because there's no enemy to crush. There's no like one place to find the people doing this. It's scattered. And so if you're the feds, you're focused on groups like the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, Three Percenters, Antifa. But you can't account for people who are inspired by these groups,
right?
Align with them, but aren't part of them. And do want to be, right? They don't want to be a part of the group, but they want to be involved and they want to be active. And I think generally speaking, that's a real fear for people. From an Open Society Foundation poll, this is a global poll, but it's a piece on the US. Quote, political violence is a palpable fear. 58% and majorities in 21 of the countries polled are worried that political unrest in their countries could lead to violence in the next year. In the United States, that figure rises to 67%. Corruption is seen as the biggest national problem. When asked about the most important challenge facing our country, respondents chose corruption. Trust in national and local politicians was low in most of the countries polled. In the United States, only 29% of those surveyed believed national politicians have their interests at heart. End quote. So, starting to get a little bit, we've got these fringe groups, they want to get active, but people aren't necessarily in those fringe groups, but they're in the chat rooms, they're in the forums, right? They hear the news, they see the stuff in their social media feeds, and people aren't trusting that their government is capable or even willing to represent their interests at this point. And of course, we are in America, and America's got the greatest wild card of them all, guns. Lots and lots of guns, right? 46% of all civilian-owned guns in the world are here. Some 107 million American adults own at least one firearm, and something close to half of households reporting owning at least one. And that changes the risk profile, right, for if and when a conflict spills over. And scattered violence is only one piece of the evidence. We're also seeing like a systematic institutional breakdown. Drawing on an article by NBC News and from Chris Armitage's Substack, quote, blue states are finally learning what red states have known all along. You don't need federal permission to govern. This is what American federalism looks like in 2025. Democratic governors holding emergency sessions on encrypted apps, attorneys general filing lawsuits within hours of executive orders, and state legislatures quietly passing laws that amount to nullification of federal mandates. Oregon is stockpiling abortion medication in secret warehouses. Illinois is exploring digital sovereignty. California has $76 billion in reserves and is deciding how to deploy it. There are daily Zoom calls between Democratic attorneys general, and they say the same phrase keeps coming up, though nobody wants to say it publicly. Soft secession. End quote. So Chris, one of the articles that I'm referencing here, he calls it uncooperative federalism. And in Codavia and Kessler's work as well, again, Chris seems to be more of on the liberal side of things. Codavia and Kessler are very much conservatives. They're also calling for similar, right? They are coding it more in the states should go their own way. Well, states' rights, ultimately, and just let the individual states decide what they want. But they're all talking about this exact same concept across the political spectrum. From the NBC report, quote, Democratic legislators, mostly in blue states, are attempting to fight back against President Donald Trump's efforts to withhold funding from their states with bills that aim to give the federal government a taste of its own medicine. The novel and untested approach, so far introduced in Connecticut, Maryland, New York, and Wisconsin, would essentially allow states to withhold federal payments if lawmakers determine the federal government is delinquent in funding owed to them. Democrats in Washington state say they're in the process of drafting a similar measure. End quote. And here the states are starting to explore uncharted waters. but they're not doing so without any legal backing. It's one thing for Texas to effectively shut down abortion clinics because they make these weird building codes that are just not feasible in a medical environment, things of that nature. And obviously, post the fall of Roe, we saw these heartbeat laws go into effect because there's no longer a kind of federal oversight of it. The legal backing that these Democrats are using in these states is 1997's Prince versus the United States case, where Justice Scalia, famous guy that he is, wrote that Washington cannot require states and localities to carry out its immigration policy. So we've had that as basically established case law for almost 30 years at this point. And then you look at the 2018 case, Murphy versus the NCAA, which was the case that struck down gambling or the restrictions on gambling. And that kind of opened that up for everyone that's why we have sports gambling ads everywhere, right? It's this 2018 case. But the concept in there was called anti-commandeering principle, essentially that the federal government can't compel the states to enforce federal regulations. So it was, right, just a case about gambling and the specific statutes that prevented it from expanding at the time beyond just a couple of municipalities where it was allowed. They're kind of looking at this going, all right, if in this case the Fed can't be compelled to force states to enforce their regulations, why stop there?
Right.
So we've got this on-the-ground activity among individuals and kind of extreme groups. And we have institutional activity that's picking up steam. I don't think that necessarily means we're in a cold civil war, right? These things happen all the time in relatively normal times, right? You see a news story about something and kind of catches your attention. You're like, what the fuck? Or, what are you people doing?
Just the quantity now is probably magnified and multiplied. How often this is happening.
It certainly seems that way, right? So I think we need to have a little bit of a framework to maybe put this into perspective and try to understand where it's at. So I think I want to go back a little bit to trace the origins of Cold War thinking. And for this part, I'm drawing heavily on a write-up by the Allied Museum in Berlin. The phrase Cold War actually goes way back. It was originally coined by Spanish political commentator Don Juan Manuel in the 14th century. He was describing the endless Christian-Arab conflict in Spain as La Guerra Tibia, the lukewarm war. His writings were republished in 1860, and the editor at the time changed tibia from lukewarm to cold. Then in 1893, a German social democratic politician, Edward Bernstein, used it to describe the state of political tension in Europe between the great powers. He wrote, "I don't know if the expression has already been used, but one could call it cold warfare. There is no shooting, but there is bleeding." And then right before the outbreak of World War I in 1914, he used it again. He said, "We continue this silent war, this Cold War, as it has been called, the war of armaments, the outbidding of arms." Yeah. Fast forward to the 1930s, and the French press starts using the term La Guerre Froide, the Cold War, to denote the geopolitical era of silent rivalry, arms races, propaganda wars, and strategic posturing short of military conflict. They also use the term La Guerre Blanche, or White War, referring to concepts like economic war, propaganda war, and bloodless war, right? So you've got these kind of collated terms that are related to what we're seeing today and also relevant to the concepts on the ground at the time. And that was in French and also in English publications at the time. There was a lot of that going on. And then we get to every right-wing meme factory's and propaganda outlet and talking heads' favorite misunderstood and misquoted writer, none other than Mr. George Orwell. He wrote in October of 1945, he published an essay titled "You and the Atomic Bomb." And he brings what I think is an important shift in the kind of underlying factors and impacts of the atomic age on the concept of Cold War, and brings some ideas that are critical for our understanding of it now, right? In short, he writes that complex, expensive weapons have a tendency to support despotism and favor tyrannical government, while simpler, more democratically available weapons empower people. And the reason for this is pretty straightforward, right? Like, if you could build an atomic bomb in your garage, then you could bring down the state at any moment. And that's dangerous for everyone. But expensive, complex weapons like an atomic bomb, they're inaccessible, broadly speaking. You're not building that in your garage. And so what happens is because of the resources and costs and everything needed, power gets put into fewer and fewer hands. States that are nuclear capable, as a result, become more ideologically entrenched because they're unconquerable, effectively. That they have this doomsday, like dead man's trigger at their disposal. And so conflict devolves into the form of Cold War that he calls an uneasy peace that is no peace. Because these states can no longer be humbled by military defeat and adapt as a result. And that's been a critical element of society and government and statecraft. And just anytime you face a defeat in war, you take a moment, heads roll, right? And then you make changes, you make adjustments. But if you have this I win button at your disposal, you never lose. And so you don't have to be introspective and to take a loss and think about what you did and change what you did necessarily, right? You can kind of just double down on the establishment.
Yeah. And I mean, for decades, instead of all out war, we've used ancillary countries and puppet countries, and we'll fund them in order to fight them, and then they'll fund them to fight them. So we don't actually have to fight each other. We'll just use somebody else to fight.
Yep, exactly. And two sentences stuck out of me in that letter that he wrote. I think they get lost in a broader concern about oligarchy, tyranny, nuclear annihilation, and just the future of an atomic world. They are, the one thing that might reverse it is the discovery of a weapon, or to put it more broadly, of a method of fighting not dependent on huge concentrations of industrial plant. And then he drops this line. He says, the radio was once expected to promote international understanding and cooperation. It has turned out to be a means of insulating one nation from another. I think you and I are quite eld at this point, and we remember the great hope, or at least I do, that the internet would bring knowledge and information to everyone, and we'd have this kind of flourishing of kind of this human renaissance as a result, knocking down barriers and misunderstandings between people.
Yeah, they just didn't think that, we'll get all the good information, but you're going to get a whole boatload of shit information. And you have to do the sifting.
And right, we trust people to do the sifting themselves, and there's a lot of it. It's not so good. We're not really hardwired for that for the most part. You put information out there that just triggers fight or flight response or leans towards our biases, and even if it doesn't make sense, it gets you going.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the critical shift towards modern conflict that brings Cold War into 2025. There's only a small handful of countries with the capability to produce a world-conquering army. And in a nuclear age, that no longer even matters because everyone's got this I win button ready to go at a moment's notice. So even if you wanted to adopt a total war footing, you've got this check against your ambitions. So how do you win a war in the modern era? And I think that brings us to the Orwell line I quoted, right? To win, you need a method of fighting not dependent on your military industrial capability. So when we ask, what does cold civil war look like? I think it's the same way that the classic Cold War wasn't just nukes, right, pointed at each other across the planet. It's disinformation campaigns, funding proxy fighters, propaganda, and giant spending packages targeted at certain groups, right? Methods not dependent on your industrial capability, but on your ability to manipulate, destabilize, and persuade. And so now we've got to take a look at it. That's always cross-border. That's international, right? There's different groups. Now we got to look at what the heck does that look like when you limit it to just inside the borders of one country? How does that look when it's just internally? And so I think it takes, again, to take a kind of peek back, I think it makes sense to kind of look at the cultural environment that in the Cold War and I think when we do that, we start to see some really eerily familiar patterns. Another writer, K.A. Corleone, analyzed how the anti-communist stance that rapidly adopted in this time influenced gender expectations. Liberals in the 60s and 50s were described as being soft on communism and Republicans as being hard. New Deal Democrats were described as being feminized and soft, which were the same adjectives that were being used to describe communism. There were fears around how masculinity was perceived and carried over into the broader culture where men were encouraged to show manly bravado and to stay strong to fight the communists at home. Women and homosexuals were also targeted at this time. Women told that their place was in the home and that they're speaking up and demanding rights that they had hard earned during the war effort, working in the factories and supporting the domestic efforts, were undermining American strength and ability to fight communism. And for the gay community, they actually did a wedge between more outwardly masculine homosexuals and the much more feminine looking ones. They even made it like anyone who's really out there and really gay looking, right? It was even within the gay community was ostracized compared to the guys who could be more in the closet, right? And showed more manliness or traditional manliness in that way. They also, this goes into what we've already covered, crime. That was another lever used regarding communism. The media focused on rarer, bloodier, more violent crimes and exaggerated the likelihood of random acts of violence, which we know generally is not the most common type of violent criminality that occurs. And at the same time, Hollywood focused on movies around vigilante justice. Think Dirty Harry, right?
Sure.
And similar movies. And if we look at all that and just think about that for just a brief moment, we have so many of the same cultural elements today, right? So much of right-wing media focus on crime post-COVID in the past 5 years. When we know, we look at the numbers, it's down. It continues to be down. It's at 30-year lows up until the deployment of the National Guard that we covered our military policing episode, right? It's still happening right up until now. If you think about when we were growing up, there wasn't broad acceptance of homosexuality, but we went from Ellen her television character coming out as gay in 1997 to Queer Eye for the Straight Guy in 2003 to the legalization of gay marriage with the Obergefell-Hodges decision in 2015. We had this rapid movement into acceptance and normalization, right, of the gay and homosexual community. Now you've got this manosphere pushback, Rogan, Tate, and all these others, and your average American male feels that they have to project masculinity through the threat of force in a lot of ways, right? Whether that's getting shredded in the gym, buying the biggest truck they can't afford, or cosplaying in tactical gear and loading up on firearms.
Yeah, the advertisements for that are just, every time I see an advertisement, I'm like, if it's not tactical, I'm not buying it. Everything is tactical. The hoodie is tactical. The jacket's tactical. The shoes are tactical. My God. What the hell is this?
My personal favorite is the tactical baby.
Oh God, I
baby
do remember
diaper
that.
bag.
Yes.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Which is funny because quick aside, a friend of mine, big gun enthusiast, huge Second Amendment guy. When we had kids, our kids were born within like 2 days of each other or something. And I had bought like the manliest diaper bag for myself. I think it was just like a plain olive or black bag or whatever at the time. He just used one of his gun bags because it had all the little pockets and everything for the magazines and everything. That was just perfect for it. I was like, you know what? I respect that.
I don't know. I think probably a time for another day is like, because you brought up masculinity, is like, what is the definition now of masculinity that is driving so much of this? Because it sure is different for a lot of people. For me, like, I don't know, being a man is not giving so much of a shit about all these things other than the really important stuff. I don't give a shit. Like, I don't care what I wear. I don't care what I'm carrying. Men not supposed to give a shit about that. But I was raised by a man from the Great Depression because I was raised by my grandfather. So, this wasn't something we gave a crap about. But what the fuck do I know anymore? Because it seems like people give a shit about what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. So I actually, right before we started recording, I saw this reel on Instagram, and it was basically a Gen Z poll of like what was the important to the personal definition of success for men and women in Gen Z, right? And for men who voted for Trump, it was overwhelmingly having children, financial independence, fulfilling job, being married, and so on down the line. At the bottom of the list was having enough money and talent to help others, able to retire early, and having emotional stability was dead last on this list. For women, fulfilling job career was number one, right? So still a top three. But for them, it was having money to do the things they want and having emotional stability round out the top three. The last ones were able to retire early, being married, and dead last was having children. right? So there's this disconnect in terms of, I don't want to say priorities, right? In what men and women want in our culture, but at least how they view success and what's important to their success. Clearly for the men, it's finding a partner and building a family. And for women, they're like, they're like, any idiot can get pregnant pretty much, right? Unless you have some sort of medical condition. So they don't view that as being successful. They're just like, I'm trying not to get pregnant until I'm ready. I want to achieve all these other things before I'm ready to do that.
And I think a lot of this is what's causing a lot of the issues right now, and why so many of these right wing and left wing people keep fighting over things, because those things are important, but they don't really ever focus on a lot of that stuff on these news reports. It's always the social issues of the random things that people just don't care that much about. If you want to be gay, who cares? Let them be gay. Focus on the thing that you just mentioned, having a good job, having a roof over your shoulder, over your head. Those are the things that you really care about.
I think the thing that gets overlooked there in that particular example is, look, you find yourself a good partner, you support each other in both of these things, right? In each of your priorities. And you get to that point together. That's the whole point of marriage and partnership and finding someone to live your life with, right? Is that you build each other up and support each other and help each other achieve your goals. But so much of the presentation, the perspective and everything is heads I win, tails you lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Is for me to get what I want, you have to not get what you want. It's this winner take all approach. And yeah, that in these just culturally broadly, how often is Taylor Swift the target of right wing attacks?
Yeah.
Right. And single cat women is being used as a pejorative to describe women in their 20s and 30s and whatnot. And women with blue hair is a constant derisive term being used, I see online by guys. Right. It's like, most of you would kill for a date with a blue-haired chick. Like, let's be honest here.
It's funny because when you said the blue hair at first, I was like, is he referring to gray hair? Because that's what they used to call older people. I'm like, no, I think he's talking about real blue hair.
No. They're talking about dyed blue hair that that a girl would have, a younger woman would have.
The stereotypes still live. I was just in a soccer practice the other day and I was hearing these women talk about, oh, my husband can only go to this store because he can't handle this other store. Trader Joe's is easy for him because there's only so many aisles. And I'm like, are you fucking serious? What, a man can't fix a dishwasher and change a diaper or pick up fucking a bottle of soda or figure out what pasta sauce to buy? Like, you serious? Are men viewed this stupidly? And then now again, maybe they are, and maybe they should be. I don't know.
That's, what do they call that? Not learned helplessness. They call it, oh God. It's just that whole like, oh, I don't know how to do this, right? And so you have to do it for me.
Lazy.
And it boils down to laziness, right? And these guys should be, dude, you can figure out how to shop in a goddamn grocery store. Just take the cart, wander around the aisles till you find everything you need. And by the way, just if you've ever talked to a person who works in a grocery store, and I once worked in a grocery store for a brief period of time when I was a teenager, they know where everything is. Just ask whatever random item is, and they'll tell you exactly which aisle it's in, which part of the shelf, if it's up or down or on the left or right. They'll tell you exactly where to find whatever random item you're looking for. So yeah, being able like, I can't shop anywhere more complicated than a Trader Joe's is, that's crazy.
Yeah, I was like, ladies, I don't know who you're married to, but you're married to either the wrong guy or you're delusional. It's one or the other. Because it doesn't make any sense to me, but that's here nor there. But I think a lot of this masculinity and the way things are supposed to be and the stereotypes that we need to have, they want to go back to a different time period, a lot of people. And there's a lot of people in this country who don't. And I think that cold civil war is what this is becoming over these issues.
Sure. Charlie Kirk, right? He promoted traditional family values, which the woman was subservient to the man. The trad wife stuff. Yeah, exactly.
When I first heard that, I was like, the trad, are they oh, that's a triad. I thought these were gangs. No. They're talking just shaving off a few letters from traditional. I was like, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Triad wife, you will have a fantastic time. You will also be short at least one kidney. Yeah,
So
but again, it does. It's Andrew Tate is an example. Like
mhm.
his whole shtick is appealing to all these disaffected young men who are struggling under capitalism to find their footing and to become financially successful and find those jobs and get that stability that they're craving. And at the same time, he teaches them to use women as objects, right?
Yeah,
And he himself is undercharged for sex trafficking
right.
as a result, right? Because of what he does. But that's what these guys are hearing, right? Here's how you become successful, and then you can treat the women like shit, right? They're not looking for partners. They're not teaching you to find yourself a partner, to help build yourself up, to address life and to take on its challenges as a pair. They're teaching you, you get successful, succeed on your own entirely, and then you can buy whatever you want, whatever type of partner
Yeah,
at that point you
and
want,
take
right?
advantage, and you do whatever you want. You're the man.
There's I saw it crop up because of the Powerball lottery last week. We had that multi-billion
Yeah.
dollar. I've seen this term pop up a little bit more recently, and they call it wife-changing money.
Oh my God,
Not life-changing money, wife-changing money. And the idea is
it's
you
funny.
get enough money that you upgrade your partner. And
Oh
again,
my
it's this
God.
objectivization, right? And look, as a joke, if it's a joke you'd make with your partner, then you both laugh about it. Great.
Mhm.
Like, go for it. If it's not the type of joke you'd say in front of your partner, then that's how you know you're saying it wrong and using it wrong.
Because it doesn't, because it sounds better than man changing money. It doesn't, like, you can't replace life with wife. It just flows so well.
It
That's a good
does.
clickbait type of title
It
there.
really is.
Sure.
Maybe we'll record an episode on that at some point. We'll go.
What do we need? What is the number we need for life changing money? That's the next episode. Oh man, but yeah, but these, I think a lot of this stuff is what, and they're purposely trying to divide it. It's not like we're dividing, like, oh, we have this core belief that the majority of one people have versus another. It's, they're purposely creating these wedges to create this.
Exactly. And again, it follows the same playbook that we've
Right.
been using as a society to attack groups we don't want and to send a cultural message of what's acceptable and what's not. And we've already done this. And now we're repeating that playbook. But again, the enemy is no longer another country. It's not a different ideology outside of our borders. It's purely within our borders. And so we have got to take a look, like, how does that translate to that ever widening gap between groups here domestically? And how is that expanding that divide between people? And we're at the point where people generally don't want to play nice with people that they disagree with. Plenty of people have been cut off from friends, family, loved ones over the last 10 years at this point. It feels like it's accelerated in a lot of ways. And I think the important thing is that they feel entitled to not have to talk to other people, especially people that they disagree with.
Right.
And add in that as a society, because of this slow push outwards, we can't even agree on what a single unified vision of objective reality is in a lot of cases. So on the political side, we can jump back here a bit to my heyday, the Clinton era, back when Newt Gingrich pushed the idea that Republicans didn't have to cooperate with the Democrats to find common ground, and instead that they had to be opposed in a very direct, blunt, and brutal way. They had to engage in ideological war with the Democrats. And that's how they were able to get stuff done as a result of that. Future Speaker of the House, John Boehner, he joined Congress in 1991, right before Gingrich took over. And I remember reading an interview with him after he became Speaker, where he described himself as the new blood freshman congressman as a changing of the guard at the time, that they were the new kids and they were kicking out the entrenched members to bring a new non-cooperative attitude, because they looked at these established politicians like, why are you working across the aisle? We don't want you to do that. We're here to basically specifically not work with our partners right on the other side of the aisle. And we saw that play out once he became Speaker during the Obama years. Him and Mitch McConnell, right, took that hardline obstructionary stance on anything congressional during Obama's terms. And the thing is, it worked.
Right.
Right. So for over 30 years now, don't play nice with your opposition has been a winning message.
And a lucrative one.
And a lucrative one.
And they may now than ever before.
And in the same way that like art imitates life and a sequel has to surpass the original and everything, right? It has to be bigger and better.
Never as good.
If that's the thing, if that's a strategy that works, is don't play nice, right? And be obstructionist. If that gets you elected and that gets you power and gets you results, that's going to progressively escalate because don't work with the other team. You can only take that so far. So you have to continually like out crazy, not just your opponent to keep your seat or to take his, but you also have to fend off people in your own party who are going to out crazy you and take it even further every single time because they know that's a winning strategy, right? To keep pushing the envelope, keep pushing the edges of what's acceptable. So to bring this whole look back together, right? And bringing like Kessler, Codevilla, and Bernstein, there's this axe to grind culturally with desegregation, with women's rights, civil rights, basically all the cultural accomplishments from the start of the Warren Court through to 2015. And then there's this attitude of, I don't have to play nice with you to achieve what I want. That is openly and obviously successful. Mm-hmm. You add in a fragmented media environment that pushes ever more siloed narratives, telling people what they want to hear and not telling them stuff that they don't want to hear. And then you supercharge it with the rise of the internet and social media, right? And it's become ever more fragmented. And it's faster, easier to get in front of people with whatever message. You've got this situation where you can exercise power without needing to compromise, and you can get your message to the people who want to hear it most without needing to water it down at all.
Mm-hmm. And they're doing a really good job.
And successful. And I think the result is going on is we have ever intensifying group identities, right? Republicans, notably in the last few years, have rapidly become much more Christian, white, and homogenous than they ever were, right? Yeah. Up until a few years ago. And Democrats have become much more heterogeneous, much more minority group friendly in that same time. Swing voters, I hate when the media uses this term during elections. They don't exist. They're all but gone, right? You no longer if you're Republican or a Democrat, you don't have to try and peel voters who are on the fence to your side. It's easier, cheaper, and cost effective to appeal to your base with an emotional appeal to a shared identity instead of appealing on policy, which people might individually disagree with. About that, right?
I think a lot of the Spanish people who voted for Trump are thinking twice now.
A fair number of them. But again, that's the whole point. If I tell you a policy of I'm going to deport all Latinos, they're not going to go for that. But if you go with a policy of we're deporting criminals, they're going to go, yeah, fuck those guys. Get them out of here. And then they ignore the fine print where criminals in this case meant Latinos.
Yeah.
And by the way, the white dude is not discriminating between Cubans, Mexicans, Haitians, Venezuelans, Colombians, right? And anyone else. They're all the same to them. And in a way that the Hispanics recognize these differences and they see them and they say, okay, it's not going to be me, it's the other guys. And they don't realize it's a blanket sweep.
Right.
I think a good example of this, right, is build the wall, right? You and I here build the wall. We go, dude, this is expensive. It's pointless. It's ugly. It's impractical. It's bad for the environment. It's easy to defeat. All you need is a rope to beat a wall, right? We know as human society, we've known how to defeat walls for over 5,000 years.
Yeah, it's not a good idea when your other solution after you build the wall is to paint it black to make it hotter. So that means it's probably not going to be working very well to begin with. If you need to make it hotter, that means if someone's figured, if I bring this 12-foot ladder, I could just climb over that thing.
Do you remember I think it was during his first campaign trail, he's like, yeah, it's going to be a big wall and it's not going to be able to scale it. Well, maybe with a ladder or like maybe with a rope. And it's like, it was an incredible just moment of self-awareness. It's been so long. I'm sure most people have forgotten about it. But again, it's not about a logical approach, right? You and I hear this and we go, no, what the hell are you talking about? But as for a significant number of people, it's just a rallying cry for immigration control. And it doesn't have to make sense. It just appeals to the feeling that they have around the subject. To quote Will Ferrell's character, Chaz Michael Michaels from Blades of Glory, nobody knows what it means, but it's provocative. It gets the people going. And that's where we've come to at this point, right? We're no longer, it's not about policy. It's not about thinking these things through. It's about this emotional appeal to these cultural touchstones
Mm-hmm.
and herding people into one group or another as a result to get what you want.
Oh
So I
boy.
think, yeah, no, it's fun. This is a good one, Adam. I'm glad we're doing this.
It's just so my watch has already told me to relax. It's
Oh
like,
man, I don't want to
listen,
look.
you're not breathing properly. You seem like you're distressed in some way. A little bit, a little bit.
Do you have like one of those life alert bracelets? Is it asking if you need an ambulance?
No, thankfully, but it does work well. It told me why I had COVID once. So before I knew I had COVID.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, I was chatting with a friend of mine and it says, relax. I'm like, I am literally just sending a message about freaking like Star Wars or something. And then I'm like, try to take a deep breath. I'm like, I can't. I was like, holy shit, I can't breathe. I got
Oh
to take a
God.
look at this. Thankfully, it didn't get worse than that, but boy, did I get nervous really quick after that.
Remember a meme that came out in like 2020 or 2021, and it was like basically you reach into your jacket pocket and you pull out a mask and you chuckle to yourself, huh, what a crazy time that was as you trudge across this postal apocalyptic landscape looking for shelter. And it's like, God damn it, like that's really starting to come into focus a little bit here, right? So I think we got to look at, so we see these cultural elements. We've got this background that kind of parallels the actual Cold War
Mhm.
internally by these cultural elements. We see what's happening with groups, and we're armed, we're angry, we're feeling underserved by our leadership,
Mhm.
and we fear violence, right? Because we're becoming more polarized and we're having less trust with
Mhm.
each other. So we've got these different visions of what the country should look like,
Right.
separating groups, little perceived common ground, and there's no single way to effectively communicate across that spectrum, right? And it's a valid feeling when you don't feel like you need to find common ground. And by the way, again, boatload of guns. So how do we find a solution, right? How do we break out of cold civil war? That Charles Kessler guy, the Claremont editor I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, he provided 5 solutions in that 2018 piece he wrote. The first one, and I love this, alien invasion.
So a miracle, or or hope for a mathematical possibility in our lifetime. I like it.
Look, it's a non-zero chance
Yeah.
that we get invaded by aliens. I think there's more than one person who's a little bit more, yeah, no, aliens, now would be the time
Hey,
to
it's
come
better
in.
than the meteor because meteor's just complete wipeout. Here, at least aliens, you got a chance.
In theory, yeah, exactly. So as funny as alien invasion is, you've got to remember, I think we talked about this in one of our prior episodes, right? When Reagan and Gorbachev met,
Yes.
Reagan asked that
Yeah.
question. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not confident that a significant chunk of MAGA would agree to cooperate with like Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi to
Yeah.
unite against an alien threat. And it goes both ways. I do not see a significant chunk of liberals working with militia types to save their own skins. I just don't see that right now for the most part. This isn't, unfortunately, this isn't like Independence Day, right? When you see
Iraq
everyone
and Israel
unite.
together. A note of
Iraqis and
that in
Israel.
the scenes and stuff. Israeli flag and Iraqi flag.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, real unity there. I don't see that happening.
No,
Just like
MAGA Trump flag and a gay rights flag. You don't see that like in the same shot.
that's got to exist somewhere. That has got to exist somewhere. I got to find that now. His second solution is persuasion, right?
Okay.
Just get enough people to agree on some unified vision, excuse me, of America. In his words, quote unquote, the type of constitution that we'll have, or learn to live with the disagreements, right? Almost like we throw our hands up and say, guys, we disagree on these things, but we've got enough common ground that we just learn to live with where we disagree
Right.
in a lot of ways. You just
Fortunately,
get
the disagreement is the see. I think that's where it's come to. Is our disagreement is that it is required for one side's disagreement to take away your thing. It's not like, all right, you could just be gay and I just don't believe in it and that's fine. It's no, you cannot be gay. Like religious wars. You cannot be Christian. You cannot be Muslim. It's not like, just go be Muslim. It's all right. That you cannot be it. That existence cannot exist. And that's a problem when you have that disagreement, you're at a loss.
Exactly. And that just really requires just enough of a critical mass of people to just be like, enough.
Mm-hmm.
Third one is what he terms reinvigorated federalism, aka states' rights. Just let each state do what it's want. Why should Minnesota and Texas have to have the same policy? Mm-hmm. Why should Florida and California have the same one?
Right.
Which sounds good on the surface. In his article, he also, actually Codavia's article, he talked about how much he loves the Constitution, right? Because he's like an originalist. He's like, and with all the amendments, and in parentheses is like good and bad regarding the amendments. And I'm like, which ones do you think are bad? Does it start with the number 13? Is that like one of the ones you think is bad? Which one of the ones are you not a big fan of? So it's one of those things where, and I dug in on a lot of their writings and a lot of others, and it was frustrating to read. I don't want to get to digress too much here, but they're basically like, yeah, you could have had a confederacy and the rest of the U.S. living side by side, or you could have just let slavery be. And it's like, no, how do you live in a world 2025 with slavery in a first world country, right? Being okay. These guys, they always gloss over these like very critical questions of what it means to be American and how we treat citizens and the people within our borders and skip over it. Anyway, again, I don't want to get too off topic here. I think that's another discussion. His fourth suggestion is secession, right? And I think he's implying just a peaceful secession in that case, right? We just decide, all right, red states are going to form their own country, blue states will form their own, and
we build a giant bridge over the red state. Nowadays, it just doesn't make like much sense because like you have like two opposite sides are blue, and then most of the middle is red, and then we get a safe passage through. And you get passage to the water if you want to go to the beach. It's not going to work.
It's one of those, what were they calling for earlier this year? It's like the California through Washington, taking Canada, grab the Great Lakes region, and then swoop back to the mid-Atlantic and come back up to Maine and just unify.
So we'll just join Canada. So maybe Trump will get it the way he wants, except it will be whatever we call ourselves and Canada.
Exactly. And then, of course, the last one is hot civil war. In his words, obviously, we start shooting. So I don't disagree with any of the paths he's got to put forward. I look at it from the Revolutionary War, right? If you think about the join or die propaganda that they were producing stateside to get the colonists on board, to understand that it was an existential threat to fight England if they weren't united as colonies. Agreeing to muddle through and deal with things we don't like is only find common ground, devolve federalism. And this is, again, I don't want to get too off topic here, but like, why bother having a USA at all if we're all going to be doing our own thing? Like, why should each state, if each state is going to act as a sovereign entity, right, and your rights differ based on which state you're in, why do we have a unified country? Like, what's the point of the federal system? At that point, Alabama should just do its own thing, right? Texas should just do its own thing. Stop calling yourselves Americans, right? Stop calling yourselves part of the US of A if you really want to take away women's rights or minorities' rights or whatever, right? At that point.
Because it will just spiral, because then you'll have other states who don't agree with those states. And then it's like, okay, then I'm going to be my own state out of my own state. And it just will be, every state will be a country. And we'll have just 50 countries.
At what point do you stop devolving? You've got plenty of these places. You've got the whole urban-rural divide is noted. So, like, do you carve out the cities and the immediate suburbs for, like, where do you draw the line? Again, people deserve their rights regardless of where they live in this country.
That's why I think goal number, I think it was number 2, was it number 2 or 3, where we all could find one common thing that we agree on. Hopefully something that is not a violent thing, where it's like, all right, we can all agree to go to war with this other country. So, or something that we can agree on.
Exactly. Yeah. Persuasion, number 2, right? We just find enough common ground to figure our shit out.
But that's the most important things we all usually have. Everything you like, 75% of people agree this, 75% of people agree this. So then why are you taking it away? That was the whole thing with abortion. It was like, wait a minute. If like 70 to 80% of people agree that that should exist, what the fuck are you taking it away then? So I think it's something we all have to agree on and say, hey, there's a bunch of people who are trying to make it so we can't agree on anything.
Yeah, and this is where things get messy, right? They go, we didn't take it away. We just left it up to the states to decide. It's like, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
If my family, the women in my family are American citizens, their rights to healthcare and the ability, the expectation to receive healthcare if they need it in an emergency shouldn't change based on which particular part of the country that they're traveling through, right? There's a difference between the resources and capabilities of the doctors and nurses and hospitals in the area where you happen to be versus not being allowed to provide healthcare, to provide healing for whatever it is. There's a major difference between those two things. And then, his last one, obviously, Civil War, secession, right? Confederacy 2, Electric Boogaloo, like the sequel. It's coming.
Looks like it. Because I think you have two parties right now that are completely on separate pages of what they're looking for and what they want. And they're really just referring to their 20% base, or I don't even know if it's that high, to be honest with you, because we discussed it earlier about the Charlie Kirk and Democrats coming out saying there's no room for political violence. There's no room for this. You have all these Democratic podcasters and Twitter people coming out like, this is like horrible. But then you have the Republicans who are like, blame everything. Who's this guy named Brian Eastwood? Charlie Kirk getting shot is the shot heard around the country. I'm ready for civil war. You want to fight and you're going to get it. Like, come on. These are what? Even President, here's Elon Musk. The left is the party of murder. What the fuck? And the president spoke yesterday and basically did not refer to any of the Democrats who were shot and killed recently, and basically put it all on the fact that it's a left thing. What? There is no interest in a unifying anything, it seems. This is what they want. And the other party is like, they don't see it coming yet. And maybe this is what it is that will unfortunately lead to more chaos, but you can't have this. Democrats need to be labeled a terrorist organization.
And I'm just looking for an update right now. The last thing I see is from 3 hours ago is that a high-powered rifle was recovered amid the manhunt for his killer, according to the FBI. So we don't have a shooter. We don't have a suspect in custody. We don't have a motive. We can infer things, but we don't know what they are. And you saw the
And this guy was not, there's no way this guy was like a regular run-of-the-Joe guy. You're not shooting somebody from 200 yards away in the middle of a crowd of people.
No, you get elevation. Like you practice that shot. You can make that shot. And that's the difference between whoever this shooter is and the guy, was it Crooks, who shot at Trump in Pennsylvania last year. He shot 8 shots and he missed with all of them. That's just being a good shooter and training and practicing. So to me, this just says either this guy does this regularly,
but he wasn't even out in the open. And he was. Yes, he was. He had a tent over him.
Yeah, but those pop-up tents are tall.
But he also had. It was not like.
And he's sitting by himself. He's got a little bit of clearance around.
But it wasn't like a flat surface. It was scaled up. So you have hundreds of people that are almost in front of him as the line goes up, because it was like a.
Are you flat earthing me, Adam?
No, but what do you call it? It's like almost like a stadium. It had like seating that went up. Yeah. So he had to shoot over all those people, through anybody who was in front of him, and still get him perfectly one shot and then disappear.
No, I've seen pictures from the back of the crowd that are higher up. You have a very good sight line for him. You have a very good sight line for him. And this is premeditated, right? This didn't happen, I think, by accident. To your point, there was enough interference, right, that someone planned this. They intended to do this.
Yes, I would be really surprised if it was like a former Army vet who was upset about how the veterans have been treated.
That was the guy who blew up the cyber truck in front of the Trump Hotel.
Yeah. Like that.
Right? Beginning of that we don't know. right? We don't have a suspect in custody. We don't know the motivation, but that with the Clintons, Obama, Newsom, right? All these Democratic leaders came out immediately, condemned the violence, and you've got shit stirring, right, from Trump and all his supporters. And I think we're going to touch on that in a little bit. So I actually want to table this conversation and keep moving here because I think it's going to go into something we're about to talk about. So those are the paths Kessler talked about, right? Invasion, persuasion, federalism, secession, hot civil war. I think, but are there like actual interventions that we can do, right? Actual actions that can change the trajectory of these and mitigate some of this. I want to refer to an October 2021 article by Rachel Kleinfeld in the Journal of Democracy, where she proposes several counters to reduce the risk of political violence. The first is election credibility. She points to legislation like the Freedom to Vote Act, which would provide a lot of the elements needed to harmonize our election processes across the country, such as automatic and same-day registration, election day being a federal holiday, protections from gerrymandering, standardized criminal penalties for voter intimidation and misinformation, and campaign finance reform, among others. Adam, that was proposed. This is a 2021 article. You want to guess if that ever passed?
Not a chance in hell. Because it makes too much sense. It makes too much sense.
It does. And look, I've worked on election day. I've assisted on those days several times. And I can tell you, people tend to believe that their local election is safe and secure. Or at least where we live, I have not been witness to or felt intimidated by anyone against us as election workers on that day. But they don't trust that it's being done properly elsewhere. As soon as it's all like object permanence, as soon as a voting site is out of sight and out of mind, they don't trust it anymore. Federal level rules would definitely help level the playing field. And it hasn't passed for a number of reasons. And we touched on this a little bit about redistricting, right? There's kind of no rules around gerrymandering at a federal level. I think the core critical reason that this legislation hasn't passed and we haven't made a movement here is because the Constitution delegates the rules for how elections are run to the states. So I don't know necessarily that we need a constitutional amendment to get this sort of reform through. And it's not just an act of Congress, right? It's a law that gets passed. But unfortunately, it's a little bit more complicated. The Constitution says, no, the states decide how the votes happen. So 50 states, we got to figure that out.
Well, maybe it's addressing of, all right, you guys get to choose basically how, but these are the guidelines you have to meet in order to do your gerrymandering or do your thing and how you divvy it up. There has to be maybe a guideline or two incorporated.
Yeah. But it goes again back to our episode on redistricting and representation. It's about power. Right. Yeah. It's about control. People they're not interested in doing an objectively right thing. They're interested in maintaining or gaining power. And so no one's going to pass a law that's going to reduce their ability to govern and to be at the gravy train that is government. Her second one is electoral rules. And I'm going to quote from Kleinfeld here. Whether politicians use violence as a campaign strategy is shaped by the nature of the electoral system. A seminal study on India by Stephen Wilkinson suggests that where politicians need minority votes to win, they protect minorities. Where they do not, they are more likely to incite violence. By this logic, Section 2 of the U.S. Voting Rights Act of 1965, which allows for gerrymandering majority-minority districts to ensure African American representation in Congress, may inadvertently incentivize violence by making minority votes unnecessary for Republican wins in the remaining districts. While minority representation is its own valuable Democratic goal, creating districts where Republicans need minority votes to win and where Democrats need white votes to win might reduce the likelihood of violence. End quote. And she also points to the Good Friday Accords that ended the Troubles in Northern Ireland, where they introduced a form of ranked choice voting and multi-member districts. Remember, we have single-member districts and winner takes all. That increased the perception of representation for whomever you vote for, because you do get a voice in the government, and it reduced the need for violence in order for people to feel heard and represented in government. So again, I think those two are very similarly related to each other, but we fundamentally need election reform. In this country.
I mean, we have a president who is doing everything he can to make you believe that elections are unfair. So I really believe we will not have a fair election again because of him. Because whatever he says, he makes sure it happens in some way.
Kleinfeld continues. She talks about policing. I think this was pretty straightforward. Basically, perpetrators of political violence must be treated the same regardless of party affiliation.
Right.
Common sense. I think I look at it from a historical perspective. One of the critical problems of Weimar Germany was in the run up to the Nazi takeover was that police and judges were significantly harsher on leftists and communists than they were on fascists for similar crimes. When the state apparatus loses its credibility as being objective and nonpartisan, you encourage violence from those who know they're unlikely to suffer consequences.
You mean like the January 6th rioters?
Perfect example, right? You storm the Capitol and these guys all get pardoned. Like, that's not a good precedent to set.
Yeah, you put 500 liberals who storm the Capitol tomorrow. We'll see how that outcome changes.
It'd be probably a fairly orderly and snooty tour. Thoughts? Her fourth suggestion is prevention and redirection. And this one's a little trickier, but she thinks up Kleinfeld brings up what I think are good points. The first is that lab settings show that warning people that they might be the target of propaganda makes them more likely to put up mental defenses. In other words, a straightforward reminder that you are not immune to propaganda will make you more skeptical in receiving news and think, am I being propagandized here? Is someone trying to sway me in a direction that I wouldn't normally go?
So Shafak said that as a scroll on the bottom, right?
Right. And
all the news shows.
Again, the lab setting shows that this is more effective for younger people than it is for people whose ideologies are more entrenched at this point. It's not really, it loses a lot of effectiveness. And I have mixed feelings on that because I think even before Trump took office the first time, it was common knowledge that he was a very failed businessman. You have loads of bankrupt schemes and companies and cons under his belt. And he was locked out of the banking system. Like, he was completely failed as a business standpoint, but people, that didn't stop anyone from supporting him, right? Or perceiving him as being a good businessman, or that he would be good for the country, good for the economy. So again, you can try the prevention and whatnot, but again, just a lot of ways people want to hear what they want to hear and believe what they want to believe. And I feel that that's already failed in a lot of ways. But from a perspective of teaching younger people to be aware of these things, the same way that we talk about scams, phishing scams and emails, right? And your IT department is always bugging you to make sure that you're not clicking on, like, how to recognize scams. I think that's important, generally speaking, but it's too little too late for our current environment, right? But maybe for the next generation, they could be more aware of this. And unfortunately, the messenger matters here a lot. You don't want to hear this from someone you don't trust or about someone you don't like. Again, so that's why it fails. The other part of that she mentions is mental health support. And again, I think that's a whole topic of its own. But what she does bring up is that people who search online for far-right extremist content are also more than twice as likely to click on mental health ads. Yeah, I found that one.
I would not think that would be the truth.
Yeah, so I think the implication here is that just better support networks and focusing on mental well-being is also an important factor in mitigating violence. And that doesn't necessarily mean therapists out there, although obviously that is what people need, that you want access to that. I think about the conversation we were just having moments earlier about that Instagram video, right? Where it was like what makes life successful for men versus women and Gen Z, right? You don't need that. Mental support is just feeling that these things are something you can accomplish and that they can be done. Ultimately, that goes a long way, that even if you haven't achieved your goals, knowing that you can, that it's a possibility and feeling that way goes a long way to making you just feel like calm and at peace.
Because you would think a lot of the people who would be clicking on that, if they're looking for those topics, would be men. And you said that was on the bottom of the list, their mental being.
I think it was emotional stability.
Yeah, that was the last place thing.
Yeah, which I don't know if emotional stability was a good phrasing, because I can't think, even myself, I don't think when I think back to myself in my 20s, would I have prioritized emotional stability? I would have been like, if I'm perfectly emotionally stable, that absolutely would have been my response. But like, if maybe phrasing it as good mental health, right? Or just being in a good headspace on a consistent basis, that probably would have scored higher, is my guess. But yeah, I wouldn't have prioritized good emotional health at the time. I would have been like, I'm fine.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah. And the last one that Kleinfeld mentions is political speech. And this one is important, especially given what just happened. In her words, partisans listen when their own leaders denounce violence, specifically against their own side. And look, the current administration likes to lean into violent rhetoric, and this is problematic for de-escalation, right? I said, as literally as I was writing this paragraph, the news that Charlie Kirk got shot came in, like as I was writing this. And I took a look, and again, we talked about this a moment ago, right? Democratic politicians across the board were denouncing the violence, and we're seeing the exact opposite from Republican officials at this moment. They're inciting more violence, and they're playing the blame game, and they're trying to capitalize on this. And we saw the same with the Minnesota school shooting last month. We saw that with Melissa Hortman's murder in Minnesota, the Minnesota state legislator earlier this summer, right? Utah Senator Mike Lee used the news of her murder to push anti-leftist narratives. It's not a good situation. The immediate jump on this is to blame the opposition. And when Trump had those multiple attempts on his life last summer, Biden was front and center denouncing the violence and saying this is not how we do things. But when Paul Pelosi was attacked, Trump mocked him.
Yeah, so did his children.
Him and Nancy.
Yeah.
And his children, yeah. So it's one thing for individual people to celebrate these and other attacks on politicians and political figures. But when you always have one side denouncing the violence and one only when the violence is directed at them, you send a very clear message that political violence is okay.
Yeah.
And so you need both sides. You need everyone to denounce political violence and be like, this is not acceptable. Doesn't mean it's never going to happen. You've got to have this consistent attitude and perception that we're not greenlighting this. We're not approving this if you do this.
Yeah, I would hope that happens, but it just seems that this is preordained.
So I want to give you an example. What happens when we don't get a resolution here?
Okay.
When these things don't go through. So we talked about contemporary signs of cold civil war, right? Stochastic violence, institutional breakdown, cultural polarization, and different possible paths forward and ways to achieve them so far. But here's the thing. We're not the first democracy to go down this path. And I want to leave us with a possible example of a future that is short of civil war, but it's a realistic probability where we don't actually find common ground and move ahead, and incidents of violence continue to escalate. Have you ever heard of the Italian years of lead?
No.
Right, you're in for a treat, my friend.
Good boy.
Yeah, wait. All right. The Italian years of lead was about a 15-year period of political terrorism that lasted from the late 60s through to the early 80s. It was marked by a wave of both far left and far right political action. In that span, there were over 14,000 politically motivated terrorist attacks committed in Italy, over 400 murders and some 1,200 casualties, though I've seen some claims of up to over 2,000 casualties, were attributed to political violence in the form of bombings, assassinations, and street warfare between rival militant factions. So
was any of the militant factions, were any of them in charge at the time?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. So communist and leftist groups conducted the majority of the violence. But what made the Years of Lead unique was that there was a very well-developed, active, and virulent neo-fascist radical right that pushed a lot of this forward in the way that it went. And I think what makes Italy's experience so relevant to our current situation is how closely the underlying conditions mirror what we're seeing today. They had social unrest, economic uncertainty, generational conflict, and most importantly, the kind of systematic breakdown of a shared reality that we've been discussing so far today. Yeah. So, and the thing that's really scary is that violence wasn't random. It was systematic. It was following a playbook, and it was deliberate. So there's a bunch of resources on this. I'm drawing heavily on an analysis done by Middlebury University's Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism for the majority of this. And I filled in the blanks with some other analyses here and there. So I think if you want to understand how Italy spiraled into nearly 2 decades of systematic political violence, you need to start with the ideas that made it seem reasonable. The Italian far right didn't just wake up one day and decide to blow things up. They had this guy, this philosopher named Julius Evola, who gave them a framework for why democracy needed to die. I'm not a biographer, and I'm not going to do Julius justice on this, at least not in the way that it's deserved. But here's a bit of a Cliff Notes version to get us going. Avola's thought process has been characterized as one of the most radical and consistent anti-egalitarian, anti-liberal, anti-democratic, and anti-popular systems in the 20th century. Basically, Evola believed that that history was this process of decay and where we'd fallen away from some spiritual golden age when everyone knew their place in a proper hierarchy. Sound a little familiar to make something great again? Yeah. And that's a pretty common fascist idea. Everything's getting worse. We need to return to traditional hierarchies. Evola had witnessed Mussolini's march on Rome, and by the 1960s, rather than trying to take power, he decided that it might be better to contribute to the fall of that which is already wavering. And he began to suggest violent action to the small groups of students and militants who visited him at his apartment. He decided to take an accelerationist approach and bring down the government. This is important because what does every ultimately successful revolutionary in history learn first? They try to take power by force, and they fail. And then they learn from their mistake, and they instead use the system to usurp power. They take it democratically, right? That's how they get legitimacy. So Evola came up with this concept called apoliteia. Basically, the idea that true warriors should detach themselves from normal politics and seek fulfillment by avoiding modern values. And his followers split on this. Some of them interpreted this as they should withdraw from politics entirely and focus on spirituality and culture. Quoting from the Middlebury Report. On the other hand, some militants held that under apoliteia, they must refuse to engage with the system on its own terms, and the differentiated man or political warrior would internally stand apart from politics and seek fulfillment through violent action aimed at destroying the system in a kind of holy war or heroic path. End quote. It's Italian jihad. That's really what it is. It's what he's calling for. So in other words, again, and not a biographer, I'm not going to go down that. Evola gave disaffected young men in post-war Italy a way to feel like heroic warriors while committing acts of terrorism. Kind of a neat trick, huh?
Yeah.
So after World War II, you had this Main Street conservative party in Italy called the MSI, basically former fascists trying to work democratically within the system. They were basically normalizing themselves in a lot of ways. And the whole party was founded by those who hope to restore fascism through parliamentary politics, right? So they're like, all right, Mussolini got hooked. We're still fascists. We're going to work within the system to restore fascism. Mm-hmm. Is their end game. But progress was slow, and the true believers got pissed off, and they're like, I want to see results. So by 1956, they saw this rise of communism within the country, and they decided to, in order to better oppose it, that the MSI was going to have a formal alliance with more moderate conservative parties, right? Coalition building, which is what you do in any functional democracy. Hardliners, the ones who were most closely linked to Julius Evola, they were already frustrated with what they viewed as the MSI's unwillingness to embrace sufficiently radical approaches. They withdrew from the party and they founded two different groups, the New Order and the National Vanguard, over the course of like the next 3-4 years. And this is a little bit of a similar dynamic to what we see today, where anyone who shows a slightest willingness to work across the aisle gets labeled a rhino, right? A Republican in name only. And they're at risk of being primaried by someone who's more pure, right? You see that, or they get publicly bullied by Trump and threatened if they don't get into line. Compromise becomes betrayal, and governance, right? Good governance and governing is selling out. So socially and culturally, things really started to go off the rails in Italy in the late 60s. So fast forward about another 10 years. You had student protests, worker strikes, and all sorts of social upheaval. And the far-right groups thought they saw their opening. And this is where it really gets truly fucked up. The neo-fascist groups embrace an approach called the strategy of tension. They see all this upheaval. They're convinced that it's communist and leftist agitation and mobilization. They think they're going to be targeted. So they organize a series of violent actions, in particular mass bombings, intended to be blamed on communist organizations in order to demonstrate the need for radical authoritarian change within the Italian political system.
Oh boy.
They did this, was that?
I said, oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy, indeed. They did this in the hope that faith in the state would be undermined and drum up popular demand for a far-right coup to produce the neo-fascist dictatorship that they've been angling for close to 20 years at this point. And let me be clear about what this means. Organized groups conducting false flag operations, blaming their political opponents with the explicit goal of making people lose faith in democratic institutions so that they'd welcome authoritarian rule. That's what these guys were doing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't random terrorism, right? This was calculated psychological warfare designed to create the exact kind of chaos to justify emergency powers. So now here's where it gets really messy. While the far right was conducting these false flag operations and blaming communists, actual left-wing militants were starting to organize their own violent response. The Red Brigades were an Italian far-left Marxist-Leninist militant group that was responsible for numerous violent incidents during the years of lead. Here's the difference, though. The Red Brigades were pretty consistently opposed by other leftist groups, including the Italian Communist Party, which was a huge and legitimate group that was the largest communist party in Western Europe at the time. The Red Brigades were denounced, and the Italian Communist Party refused to support their tactics. Whereas on the right, the MSI was collapsing under the pressure of their most extreme members and these breakaway wings. So, quoting again from the report, accompanied by left-wing terrorism in a mutually amplifying process, these neo-fascist organizations continued to organize and launch bombing attacks through the early 1970s. However, by 1975, the major organizations had been criminalized and prosecuted for their violence and under statutes prohibiting the reconstitution of the fascist party. The New Order and the National Vanguard faced formal dissolution at the hands of the state, and the remaining neo-fascist leaders recognized the strategy of tension as a failure, as a hoped-for collapse of public faith in democracy, and the coup d'etat had not materialized. End quote. So it didn't work. The false flag strategy didn't work. People didn't buy it. Italian democracy didn't break. And you'd think that'd be the end of it, right? Mm. What happened next was the right started the violence, but the left met them blow for blow. They did not back down. And at this point, we're already 20 some odd, almost 30 years in total, right, on from World War II. And the next generation of neo-fascists start to take over the young guard. Most of them are in their late teens and early 20s. They had no memories of Mussolini, no memories of what happened at the end of the war. And they also had no meaningful success and little hope for winning power politically. Mm-hmm. They decided to double down.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, joy, right? Probably the single biggest example of left and right violence mutually feeding off of each other and escalating was the kidnapping and murder of Aldo Moro in 1978. Moro was a left-leaning Christian Democrat and had served as prime minister multiple times. Moro was, for all intents and purposes, the center. And during this time, he worked to find common ground and build consensus and bring many of the various factions into the governing process. He was working to bring the Italian Communist Party into the coalition when he was kidnapped by the Red Brigades. The Red Brigades, they opposed the compromise that would bring the Communist Party into the coalition because it wasn't revolutionary enough. They wanted to overthrow the system entirely, not reform it. And far-right groups opposed it because they saw it as legitimizing the left and would undermine their narrative that communists were an existential threat and that required extreme measures. So this guy's trying to do good governance, right? Do what you're supposed to do, build consensus, find common ground, and nobody on either side wants him to do it.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly. After 55 days of captivity, Moro's bullet-riddled body was found in the trunk of a car that was deliberately parked at the midpoint between the headquarters of the Christian Democratic Party and the Italian Communist Party. It was a clear message. You try to cut this middle ground, we kill you.
Well, when does it get good? When does this become hopeful? I think my watch exploded.
So what drove the generational split home were the Acca Laurentia killings in January of 1978. So remember I mentioned, right, the young guard was starting to take over, especially on the fascist right. Mm-hmm. 2 young MSI members were killed by left-wing militants while they were exiting their local party headquarters. This sparked riots by the fascists and the other MSI members, and another MSI member was killed by a policeman from what is supposedly a stray bullet. The old guard of the MSI took a cautious approach to justice, letting the state prosecutors do what they needed to do and did not denounce the suspected police shooter. The younger members took that as a betrayal of the militants by the older, more conservative generation. So think about that. This older group, this vanguard of right-wingers, is just like, we're trying to maintain some connection to the existing system. We want to let things play out in an orderly fashion, even when their own people got killed. Cooler heads were prevailing. And the younger generation saw that as the ultimate betrayal. Quoting again from the report, the youth groups, including a number of future Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, NAR, militants, took to the streets for 3 days of widespread outrage violence. Determined to demonstrate their perceived need for armed resistance against left-wing violence and a more radical path forward for neo-fascism, these youths demonstrated a final break with the old political tactics and a wholehearted embrace of armed struggle. End quote. So does it sound familiar? Like, think about how many young far-right activists today view establishment Republicans as traitors for not being willing to fight hard enough. Sure. Think back to Newt Gingrich and John Boehner taking that confrontational approach. Same dynamic, different decade. So the NAR, the Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, these guys were fucking cuckoo bananas. They no longer had clear political goals. What they had was an absolute unwillingness to compromise and to collaborate politically. And they started to even aim their violence at other right-wing groups. Here's a quote from NAR leader Francesca Mambro that really gets to the heart of what they were about. Quote, "We are not interested in seizing power, nor in educating the masses. What counts for us is our ethic, to kill enemies and to annihilate traitors. The will to fight keeps us going from day to day. The thirst for revenge is our food. We shall not stop. We are not afraid to die, nor to end our days in jail. Our only fear is not to be able to clean up everything and everybody." End quote.
Well, just murdering sprees and purposeless. Nice.
Right. They're no longer like actively pursuing a political goal at this point. They're entirely dedicated to armed struggle and viewing themselves as victims of left-wing violence and erasure by the state and their historical political groups that represented them. They're like, fuck this, fuck you, fuck everyone. And so right at this point, the violence becomes an end in and of itself. It's completely divorced from any practical political objective that they're trying to achieve. It wasn't about political violence as a means to an end, right? It was a cycle of violence for the sake of violence. The Red Brigades at this time were also evolving towards pure violence as well. Earlier, they'd been focused a lot on mobilizing workers in the factories and with the working class. In the mid-70s, they shifted to focusing their efforts on attacking the state. They view the state as the weakest link in the chain of power, and they saw the opportunity to knock out the establishment and decided to go for it. Among other activities, they engaged in a series of symbolic kidnappings, and they released each of the hostages unharmed until the execution of Moro happened. And that right there, the execution of Moro, gave the far right exactly what it wanted. Justification for that strategy of tension and evidence that what the left really was violent and dangerous. And it validated their own extreme measures that they were doing. So everyone's kind of like, I got to step up my game. And everyone else is looking at it going, they're stepping up their game. I've got to step up my game. Just this mutually reinforcing cycle of violence. And I think what makes the NAR so relevant to our current situation, they pioneered this model of decentralized, inspired but not directed violence that we see everywhere today. They followed a philosophy of armed spontaneity, basically a loose affiliation of overlapping groups that would organize for a single action and then disband. Violent, impermanent, poorly organized by design. Think about Antifa and the way Trump and others talk about defeating it. But Antifa is a concept. Antifa is not a group, right? These guys pioneered functioning under that kind of philosophical umbrella, but there was no target, no structure for the state or others to go after in response, or to even like preempt the attack and infiltrate it and prevent it from happening. And that was Francesca Mambro's intent, not to use that name to refer exclusively to the group itself, but to serve as a label to which any militant could attribute a clear anti-system revolutionary action. We talked about earlier, right? You've got Proud Boys, Patriot Front, Three Percenters, Oath Keepers, Adam Waffen Division, Boogaloo Boys, the KKK. Imagine if they were able to rally and coordinate for specific acts of violence with no formal command structure and then just disappear into the background just as quickly. That's what happened in Italy at this point and where the escalation had gotten to. So over a 2-year period, the NAR claimed over 100 terrorist attacks. And because they were fundamentally anti-system and fuck everyone, they targeted the state, communist and left-wing organizations, and fellow right-wing groups in the name of purifying their movement. Everyone, left, right, and center. It was pure accelerationism. They wanted to bring it all down. So here's a quote from Neo-Fascist Journal on the radical potential of the NAR's use of violence. Quote, "The legionaries' action is destructive and creative because all that has been generated by this society gets purified by it." End quote. They were following this concept that you need to make things worse to make them better, that the system's so corrupt that it can only be saved through its complete destruction. Julius Evola had this model of men standing among the ruins, these exalted figures building a new age on the foundation of an old race society. And they were trying to achieve that. They wanted to be the survivors who would rebuild after the collapse, that they would be the chosen ones standing among the ashes.
Oh, boy.
Absolutely batshit.
Yeah. It's always the batshit ones who always rise up. Oh, that's the problem. It's always the crazies.
So you ask when this gets good or gets better.
It gets better for our hope. Yeah, waiting for the hope.
It's here, Adam. So the far right ultimately burned itself out because the violence had become performative rather than strategic. It became about feeling like a warrior and not about actually achieving anything concrete. Their grand ambitions for heroism and the destruction and renewal of a materialistic society proved unachievable because Italian democracy was still there. It had outlasted and it survived the political polarization and violence. In a lot of ways, their approach was nihilistic. And after a while of doing anything you enjoy, right? Think about activities you have. You get to a point where things get tough or it's a quiet moment or you're just feeling beat and you're kind of like, do I even enjoy this anymore? That started to happen to these guys, right? They're like, why do I keep doing this? I'm like, what am I achieving? I'm like, I did violence for the sake of violence, but now I'm like, I'm a little tired of doing that. And what's my motivation? And again, you think about those lists of what is important, right? What's a successful life? So these kids, they go, I want to get married. I want to have a kid, right? I want a stable career, whatever it is. They weren't achieving anything like that. So they took a moment to step back to like, shit, what are we actually doing? And I bring up the years of lead specifically, not just because I find them interesting. The same philosophical framework that drove Italian terrorism in the 70s is actively circulating through contemporary American far-right spaces. Julius Evola remains a key ideological figure of the neo-fascist movement, and his philosophy gets posted on various far-right forums even today. Even on like less extreme groups, users will push memes that say like read Evola into groups for Proud Boys, QAnon, and others. Right? It still continues to get circulated. It's not completely out of the realm. The end of the years of lead, here you go, Adam, came when Italian society basically said, enough. Each side had used the other's violence to justify their own escalation. The far right could point to the Red Brigades and say, see, we told you communists were violent. The far left could point to neo-fascist bombing and say, see, we told you the state was fascist and needed to be overthrown. Everyone's pointing fingers. But the vast majority of Italians, including mainstream left and right political parties, were caught in the middle of this escalating cycle of violence, and neither side wanted it, and they didn't support it. They hadn't supported it for a long time. From the Wikipedia entry on the Red Brigades, quote, in the words of historian David Broder, rather than causing through their actions a radicalization of the Italian political landscape as they had hoped, their actions resulted in blowback and a decline for extra-parliamentary left and right. End quote. So extremists on both sides, they overplayed their hand. The violence was so widespread and so random that it had no more political coherence. Once they started killing their own people, the public they stopped viewing it as political action, and they just started seeing it as simple criminality. And once it stops being tied to a political goal, it is just crime. And you know how to deal with crime, right? You approach that with law and order. So here's the uncomfortable part. It did permanently change Italian culture, the political culture. The centrist consensus that Moro was trying to build never emerged, and Italy entered what became known as the Second Republic, a more fragmented, more polarized, and more susceptible to populist appeals, right? So their culture, their politics, their government did change in this way, and not necessarily for the better, but they got past this, right? And I think when we look at America, 2025, we're seeing some eerily similar patterns here. You've got that institutional breakdown and loss of faith in traditional processes. You've got scattered political violence that is becoming ever more normalized. You see elements within the state security apparatus that seem more loyal to political factions than to democratic institutions. International involvement in domestic political conflicts. And you see that cultural polarization that makes compromise feel like betrayal. So I think the question is really like, are we heading down the same path Italy went down? Or can we recognize and mitigate some of these patterns early enough to change the course? Because Italy's experience shows us that once this kind of systematic political violence takes off, it could take a long time to undo the damage. And that some of the damage might ultimately be permanent. Again, the big reason it stopped was the Italians were like, they ran out of people who wanted to commit violence in the name of politics, is really what happened, right? They threw enough bodies at the problem that they no longer had bodies to throw at it. And I think if I know my fellow Americans the way I think I do, I don't think we have it in us for a prolonged conflict, right? We're too spoiled as a culture, as a people. We want burgers, beer, football, and trips to Disney. And anything that interrupts those things is cultural suicide. But they also had the same thing we're struggling with now, political culture, right, where compromise is a dirty word and the center isn't holding against the extremes.
There's no unifying center. There's no center political group, no third party. There's nobody who's like, or these two are not working out. They really just despise each other at this point. And we got to do something about it. I was watching the other day about, what is it? I think it's Arkansas farmers who are really struggling right now, voted for Donald Trump and even said they would choose differently now because basically China stopped buying all their soybeans and they're not making any money and they might not keep their farms. And they basically want handouts. They want Trump to do what he did the last time he was elected and to give them money. So some other guy, a liberal, was like, fuck you. You're not getting my taxpayer dollars. This is what you wanted. And I think that's going to be a hard thing to overcome is when you come to your Jesus moment and you realize, oh, I fucked up. I made a mistake. Help me. As a lot of people are going to be like, how the fuck do you want me to help you now? I'm not in a position to help you. You could do it, though.
It's cathartic, right? To be like, you voted for this. Have the day you voted for is a bit of a meme. But in the same way, when we deal with wildfires, hurricanes, landslides, flooding, right? All these things, we need to, if we're going to be a country, we need to support each other. We need to back each other up. In the same way we talked about, does Gen Z men and women have different priorities? It's not about that you have different priorities. It's that you find a partner to help build those priorities together and to support each other in achieving those things, right? We've got to approach that the same way in this country, that we're all in it together. I get it. It's cathartic. It's easy to look at these farmers and be like, dude, you voted for him last time. You had to get bailed out because he nuked your entire crop, right? Because of tariffs. And now he's did it again. Like, how many times does this have to happen? No, I'm not helping you. But that's not going to resolve this, right? We've got to support each other. We got to pick each other up because, otherwise we're not going to find political common ground. We're not going to find those shared values. And we don't have to agree on everything. We just have to respect each other enough and have enough shared ideals and values that we can just be like, hey, we'll sort everything else out. It's not that important.
There needs to be a common ground because I think at this point you're like, if I help you now and you're on a track record of always fucking me over, is this going to be a good idea? Because you're just going to keep fucking me over. It's just that whole, I'm like, okay, of course you should be helped. But every time I get screwed, you fuck me. Try to overthrow the government. On January 6th, you voted for him again. You had 4 years to really think about it.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? Yeah, you look at it like, how could you vote for him again? Is an easy way to look at it. So he screwed you the first time, he did all this stuff. No solutions were offered to these people's problems and their needs. Our government has not been serving the needs of the people. No. I disagree with Kessler and Codavilla wholeheartedly. It was so difficult for me not to go on this whole tangent, like breaking down how bullshit each and one of their arguments was. But I respect that they have those opinions. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I see that we all want the best for America, right? I disagree with how they see it and they view it, but we all want good outcomes for each other. And our government has not been serving us. What was that JFK line, right? Ask not what you can do for your country, or excuse me, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. The problem is we feel at this point, right? We're 60 years on from that line, Samad, and we feel we're giving and giving and giving and giving and giving to this country and getting very little in return. And that or at least the return is not going to ourselves. And we need to have, we need political leadership that is not beholden to super PACs and billionaire donors and dark money, that is pursuing agendas that don't benefit us at this point. We need to aggressively pursue the Epstein case and go after every motherfucker who was on that plane, who was on that island, who was in his Manhattan townhouse.
Look, have you seen the images in some of those?
I have a copy of it from years ago. I have the phone book. And I actually have an article here, I think from Mother Jones, where someone called every single number. And it's a fascinating read. I haven't finished it. I have to
No, I mean like his birthday, 50th anniversary book that they just released.
Oh, that one? Yeah, just the one that the Trump one that was already, I didn't read the others.
God, there was one with like balloons being handed to children. Like he looked poor and he was handing balloons to children, and then they cuts to another picture of him laying on a beach with other children touching him and stuff. And it said, isn't it America great or something? It was just really disturbing shit. And there was one with, I guess, Trump also, besides that thing where like it was a check for a woman for like 20 grand because of depreciation. I guess maybe she was like used. I don't know. They bleep out who she is, but I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. How is this not? Oh my God. And it's funny that, it's not funny, but it's strange that this poor guy would be assassinated like a day or two after this book was released. Like all the photos.
You also had some of the Epstein survivors had that press conference a few days ago.
Yeah.
On Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe.
Last week,
no,
it's
wild. Or was it last week? Yeah. It's very recent. It was within the last week. Yeah, you've got this, and you've got Thomas Massey and Roka Hanna working across the aisle to provide a release of the information that's out there. This is the thing. We see a two-tier justice system.
Yeah.
And we see it so many ways. And you know that you don't have to look past like OJ to understand that if you have the money for a good defense, you're going to get off. And we see that constantly. And we know that it's unfair and we're getting screwed and life is harder and it's harder to pay for things and things are getting more expensive and all this, it's consistently spiraling. We need our politics to reflect the needs of the people. And it doesn't. It reflects the needs of donors. And those donors are wealthy, overwhelmingly. And until we start to pursue justice equally, which is one of the points that we talked about, until we stop making election fuckery so easily accessible to people who want to move things in a certain direction. Like we've got to have an equitable system. We've got to have an even ground, and it's a big task. I don't know how we approach it though, right? Do we just stick with the current government we have, but clean house entirely, right? What do we have? We have 535 members of Congress, 9 Supreme Court judges, and 2 people in the White House, right? So we've got just under 550 people. Like, do we throw them all out and put in just some sort of caretaker government just to make the changes we need, right? Do we have that constitutional convention? How do we prevent that from being hijacked by the people who are currently hijacking our government and the policies and making it work against us, right? How do we prevent people from falling prey to all this propaganda that's clearly meant to skew them in one direction or another, to appeal to emotion rather than logic and reason and intellect?
You
There's
know,
no good answer.
we talked about like some form of unity. It sounds so insane, but this Epstein thing, I mean, when you have Green and Bobart agreeing with Democrats on something,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's the seed, guys. And there's the seed that we got to figure out how to like water it and feed it, because those guys are as right as rain, and a lot of those lefties are as left as whatever the synonym for that would be. But this is it. Like they're even like, hey, this is wrong. Maybe this is it. And this is the thing that unifies people and says, okay, this guy was a shithole. Let's change things up and let's go after these people and do things the right way and bring things back not the way they were, but let's
Mm-hmm.
fix it. Like actually fix it instead of being just crushing everything. And I think that it's just weird to think a pedophile can unify the country.
You
Crazier
know
things
what?
happen, right?
I would say, yeah, I feel like stranger things have happened. I can't think of a single one off the top of my head, but yeah, if this is the impetus we need, right? This is the shock that kind of gets us going and gets us working together. Fantastic. Look, by all accounts, there's over 1,000 Epstein victims. Only about 160 some odd have come forward, right, and had their stories validated and received some sort of compensation. But no one has, aside from Ghislaine Maxwell, no one's been prosecuted for this. And it's the same thing where you want to stop drugs, you don't go after the dealer on the corner. You go after the cartels. And really, you don't necessarily go after cartel. You don't go after the cartels militarily. You go after the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
You make it no longer financially viable to do this. Same thing with prostitution. You don't arrest a prostitute on a corner. You end the financial situations that cause people to go into prostitution. That's how you stop it, right? You don't criminalize these people because they need to rely on the law, right, to get recompense when something happens to them. The same way, we've got stopping sex traffickers is a noble goal, right? You need to stop the people who are fucking buying the victims of sex trafficking in order to stop this. That's how you get to it.
Yeah, it says the immigration thing is like you fighting the wrong people. If nobody was hiring them, nobody was giving them employment, there'd be no reason for them to come here. Don't hate the brown guy, hate the rich white guy who's hiring them and getting rid of you. And then when he can't get rid of you because of them, he just sends your job to another country.
It's an age-old tactic to turn poor groups against each other, right? Because if they unite, they're going to target the wealthy groups.
Yes.
That is just a tale as old as time. And again, we need something that we can accept as just an objective reality and a single source of truth for people to start to move past that. And we've got to want to do that. We've got to want to move past it and look past minor disagreements, right? Like, I think I texted you a few weeks back. I was like, am I going crazy? Like, I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene twice within the span of about a week. What the fuck crazy world am I living in? But you know what? I honestly, I care less about what you've done, but more what we're trying to achieve. And if your goals are to accomplish this, I'm happy to put aside, right? I don't need to be judged the same way they don't need to be judged. But if we want to accomplish something, let's do it.
Yeah. No, 100%. I hope that cooler heads prevail and they can find some kind of common ground before a lot more people get hurt. But the fact that so many children have died in schools over the years doesn't make me think that people are going to care that much more about a random podcaster or conservative talker or talking head.
No, and I had this discussion this morning with my wife. She's like, and I was like, no, I know I'm talking to largely the base, right? I'm not talking to someone whose mind I'm likely to convince otherwise, who's open to listening. I know that's not the environment that we live in at the moment. So I'm just saying for my own benefit at this point. Again, we have like 2 subscribers, so it is largely for your benefit and mine. But yeah, but I said it needs to be said. You can't just let one group or another hog all the space in this situation, all the talk, all the conversation. And I think we all need to be more accountable and take control and agency over our own lives and feel less that someone else will take care of it for us, which means we have to stand up for ourselves and what we believe in. And I think it's important for us to bring this stuff up and to talk about it.
No, absolutely. I think the more middle talking you get and hear, the more likely you are to realize that those other really extreme choices are not the right answer. Because I think the majority of people are in the middle. You just see poll after poll. So many people believe in certain things that we all do believe in. But the minute a Republican or a Democrat says those same things, forget it. I don't care about it anymore. And that needs to change. Or there needs to be a third party.
Yeah, no, I see that with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez all the time, right? People are like, I hate her. She's so stupid. She's just a bartender, blah, 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 this and that. And they're like, but I agree with her ideas. It's like, so don't hate the messenger, right? Why are you hating on the messenger? If you agree with the ideas, maybe she's got a point.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to like her, but if you like the message and you agree with it, why are you hating? Like, what does that accomplish for you?
It's the feeling that you can't give the other group just an edge, an inch, a centimeter, nothing.
That's what it is. And we are slowly moving outwards, right? We're following that Italian thing right now. We're not taking these big steps, but we're not coming into the middle. And we're not willing to come into the middle. I don't think we're flying out to the edges yet. Right. But we have to want to work together. There's examples, again, like I said, Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna are uniting over the Epstein files, right? We see Lauren Boebert at MTG, like you just said, right? Bringing these things up. I think we can find enough common ground that we can get around some of this bullshit and find a way forward.
I just can't believe there's so many people who don't agree.
It's most people are just worried about paying their mortgage and making sure that they've got enough money for Christmas to buy their kids something that they want, that sort of stuff. And they just want to, again, watch some football and drink some beer. Like, they just don't want to be bothered with the rest of this, but we all get caught up in it, and no one really dedicates as much time to it as we do.
Yeah, we just want to live. And there's too many people in this country, in this world, who really just want power more so than just as much as we want to just live. And that's a problem. It's
too profitable to stir shit up.
Yeah.
That's a core issue here. It's we can find a lot of common ground, but then as soon as some soy boy beta cuck meme about Gen Z or millennial men comes out, you're going to get all this kind of like going on around it, or about blue-haired women or something, or gravy seals, or just pick any sort of, or boomers, pick any sort of stereotype within our culture about a particular group. And it's so easy to get worked up about it.
Yeah. We need to make sure this cold civil war does not become a hot one.
Indeed. All right, Adam. Appreciate you joining me today.
As always. Always. I just think you need to, when you tell us a story that I think is going to have a hopeful, super happy ending, like fairy tale. It didn't have it as much as what I was hoping for. Like peace on earth, everybody got a bowl of pasta and some lasagna, and everybody had a party, and everybody was happy.
Hey man, Italy's lovely. So all's well that ends well.
I think I don't know the number, but I think they've had like 10 or 15 different governments in like the span of like 15, 20 years.
They had like 700 prime ministers.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's I saw a meme once. It was like showing all the European governments and the prime ministers. And then it was like their eyes, like their photos. And you've got England, you've got like a handful, right? France, you've got a handful. And Italy is just like, up. And someone was like, Italy, blink twice if you're okay. Like, but wonderful place to visit regardless. So yeah, this is our pitch for Italian tourism to sponsor this podcast. Visit Italy. We're not bombing each other anymore.
Yeah, and you can buy $1 at homes. If you live there.
True. Absolutely. All right, buddy. I'll catch you later. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Idiots Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotsmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.